Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of BCP Council's Audit and Governance Committee. A very warm welcome to not only members, but members who are filling casual vacancies, and to the officers here in the room, and also, of course, to those watching online, including any members of the public who are joining us. If I could now ask Mr. Hanson from Democratic Services to go through the housekeeping arrangements for the evening, and then perhaps to take items 1, 2 and 3 on the agenda. Mr. Hanson.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Please note that this meeting of the Audit Governance Committee is being recorded by the Council and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. Anyone who's on the call but not in the room and wishing to speak, please use the raise your hand feature and switch on your video when invited to speak. Please could members in the room only speak when invited to by the Chairman and mute their microphones when not speaking. And finally, please could I ask you to also ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you. And moving on, Chairman, to item 1, I have apologies from Councillor Brooke and from Councillor Cox and from Councillor Filer. Chairman, I note that Councillor Howell is on the call but not present in the meeting, so wouldn't be entitled to vote if we did come to a vote. Moving on to item 2, Chairman, substitutes. Councillor Parvadin is substituting for Councillor Brooke, Councillor Brown for Councillor Cox, and Councillor Williams is substituting for Councillor Filer. Moving on to item 3, may I ask any members for any declarations of interest?
They don't appear to be any, Mr. Hanson. So could I also welcome Councillors Podovan, Brown and Williams to the meeting. Thank you for filling in for colleagues who are absent this evening. It's appreciated. Takes us on to item 4 on the agenda, which is confirmation of the minutes. Confirmation of the minutes held on the meeting held on the 27th of October 2022. For those who are present, could I have your agreement that those are a true and accurate record of our meeting? Councillor Phipps.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just bring up that, unfortunately, it's the next item, which is before the minutes, which is a bit unfortunate, is that there is a public statement from Mr. McKinstry where he believes that actually the minutes are not correct. And I wonder if we could get a comment on that. He's basically saying that in the additional note on page 9 of the agenda reports pack, it says that issues raised in the public statements of the 27th of October meeting will be referred back to the Constitution Review Working Group for consideration. Well, in fact, most public statements are about the proposed restrictions on public participation at meetings, and those matters are not going back to the working group. And he thinks that that note relates to public statement 3 in the draft minutes, which was the members' rights of access to information at meetings. He thinks there's a muddle up, and I'm wondering if I get comment on it, because it's the next thing on the agenda, but I think I ought to raise it now.
Surprisingly, I'm prepared for that.
Oh, well done.
And we have arranged that all members of the committee who are present here this evening would be circulated with that question so that everybody knows what it is in advance. And I have, unusually, because normally you wouldn't respond to that statement, I will be making a response at that time, which I hope will satisfy the issues that he and indeed you are raising. So subject to that, could I have agreement that the minutes are a true and accurate record of our meeting held on the 27th of October 2022? Agreed by all? Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. And if you could note that, please, Mr. Hanson, which neatly
Chairman, if I could
Phipps?
actually abstain on that, because I haven't heard what you're going to say, so it's a little bit. Sure.
If you wish to abstain,
I will
you're
abstain,
perfectly
thank
welcome to do so. So I'll go back and check. In fact, in that case, I will take a vote. All those in favour, please indicate. No, you mustn't.
So it's four in favour.
So I did preface this, I thought, relatively neatly. All those who were present at the meeting and deem them a true and accurate record of what took place at our meeting on the 27th of October 2022, could you please indicate? Those in favour, please. Any against? And with one abstention, two abstentions. So Councillor Phipps and Councillor Brown both wish to abstain.
Yeah, there somebody was substituting for the councillor.
It's unfortunate because this meeting is live webcast. It doesn't really, I think, reflect the work of the committee very satisfactorily so far. So, could I take, please, item 4 on the agenda, item 5 on the agenda, the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of October 2022. All those who were then present and deem them a true and accurate record, please could you indicate your affirmation?
Good.
Thank you. And those against? None.
No.
And those who are abstaining? 2. That's Councillors Phipps and Brown. If you could note that in the minutes, please, Mr. Hampton. Takes us on to item 5 on the agenda, which is public issues. Mr. Hampton.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received one public statement, no public questions. And the public statement is from Mr. Alexander McKinstry, who's not able to be at the meeting, has asked that his statement be read out. And the statement is as follows. The draft minutes from 27th October may have been amended by now, but contained one potentially misleading paragraph. The additional note, page 9. There was talk in the meeting of taking a public issue and referring it to the Constitution Review Working Group, but that related only to what has since been transcribed as Public Statement 3, members' rights to information under the Constitution. Most other public statements that night concerned public participation at meetings, and there was no pledge to refer any of those matters back to any working group whatsoever. Brackets verifiable from live stream 1715 onwards, and Mr. McKinstry provides us with a YouTube link. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. And as I'd already indicated, I do intend to respond to it. I think it's appropriate that I should. My response is that at our meeting on the 27th of October, the chair of the Constitution Review Working Group undertook to give consideration at the working group to issues raised relating to the Constitution. This is the proper way in which to bring forward these types of matters for careful consideration and review. The working group can then make recommendations as appropriate to this committee, who will then, in turn, and if necessary, make recommendations to full council. And if I could ask Mr. Hampton, could you relay that response to Mr. McKinstry on behalf of myself and the committee, please?
I will, Chairman. Thank you.
So, members, that takes us on to item 6 on the agenda, one of our 2 substantive items for this evening, both of which are presentations. And the first presentation is with regard to transformation. And just for the benefit of those who are perhaps online, I will read out what narrative there is to accompany that, since there aren't any papers for this meeting. and that is that to receive a presentation to provide the committee with assurance that the risks associated with the Council's transformation agenda of BCP Council services and functions are being suitably managed. I don't need to remind members of the committee that we will need to stick fairly rigidly to that definition, and that we mustn't stray into items that are outside of the assurance of risks issues that we're responsible for in terms of the governance arrangements for the Council. And I'm sure there'll be plenty to occupy our time within that relatively narrow remit, because I think there are some important governance issues that we need to be clear about from this evening's presentation. The order of that presentation will be that the Chief Executive will lead with, first of all, some opening remarks about the generality of transformation, but then into providing that assurance, followed by Katie Lacey, who's the Service Director for IT, who I think is online. And then, in addition to that, we have Adam Richards, Chief Financial Officer, who is online should there be any questions about financial issues. And we also have Fiona Manton online as the facilitator of the Council's risk register. So I'm trying to tie up between those four officers any issues that may come up, but also making sure that we then feed back any responses directly into Fiona Manton so that she can capably manage this aspect of the risk register. So if I could turn then first of all to Graham Farrant, Chief Executive, who will introduce this presentation. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to the committee. You'll know that Corporate Risk 13 is the one that's identified as the risk is failure to deliver the transformation programme, and that risk effectively embodies a change programme rather than necessarily specifically a financial risk. But I'll talk about the programme, and we'll talk about the financing of it and the risks within that as well. I think you will all know as councillors that we started on this journey. We embarked on it through local government reorganisation. So there was real opportunity through the merger of the preceding councils, four preceding councils, but there was also significant opportunity through a transformation programme that would make the councils, the new council, leading edge, efficient, as digital as it could be, and as accessible as it could be. So what I thought I'd do is I'll go through a presentation with a bit of background on the transformation programme, and we did a bit of that at the last meeting, but then we'll focus on the management of the key risks and the delivery of the programme. We'll identify where those risks are, talk about the three key elements in terms of IT in particular, and the big risks in that, and then talk a bit about the finances, if that's okay, as an order. So if I can share my screen, I will endeavour to do so with that one. That should be coming through slowly. There's a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so there's a slide, and I'm happy to share these slides after the meeting if that will help. So I'm going to do the first part, then I'm going to bring Katie Lacey in to talk about the customer and the data parts, and I'll talk about enterprise resource platform, then a bit about finances. But just as a reminder, we set out in 2019, and under a different administration, but engaging across party, we agreed some design principles. And again, I won't go through these in detail, but they're really about focusing on putting the customer at the heart of what we're doing, creating a culture of innovation and change within the council, and really trying to make sure that we were looking at new ways of doing business as modern as possible, but doing it with partners as well. And then working across the board, it's a whole corporate change. It isn't a change in just services. This is a redesign of the council as a whole. And those design principles were agreed, and I think have been around probably since about October 2019 at that point. We've also developed the target operating model, the diagram that I went through last time, which is on the left, which is fundamentally building on data and insight to drive our services for the future, making our internal services as transactional as possible. More on that later when we talk about the enterprise resource platform, and then digitally enabling service delivery where we can, which should free resources for us to spend on those customers that can't operate digitally, where we have to do detailed assessment, face-to-face contact, etc. So the more we can get people to engage with us in a more efficient way, the more that should free resources to deal with those people that can't deal with us digitally or on the telephone. And that all was driving towards the vibrant communities with an outstanding quality of life where everybody plays an active role, that message that we had within our corporate strategy. There are three principal elements to the IT base within that. There's a customer platform, which is a customer relationship management system, really trying to link the data for our customers and making sure that the customer journey is more simple, more informed, more easy for them to use. So the connected citizen, Katie will talk about that in a minute. Underpinning everything is a common data a common data platform, and Katie will talk about that as well. And that's about integrating the information that comes out of our systems, and then playing it back to us as a cohesive view of what we're doing. And then the enterprise resource platform, the ERP, which is the internal mechanism. So it's a new finance and HR system. At the moment, none of the preceding councils had, and therefore we don't have a single system that links posts and payroll and costs of people with the budget and where the budget is paid from and how the budget is distributed. So this is a new system coming in which will do that. And then alongside that, going on the right-hand side, a fundamental service redesign of every single service. So we've done housing, we've done environment, we're embarking on all of those services, redesigning them, making sure they've got up-to-date IT, up-to-date systems and common practices across the three preceding councils area to form properly harmonised services. So that's the sort of the transformation programme on a page, if you like, and the ambition to become the leading digital and insight-driven authority in the country. Three major themes within that, and we often talk about the transformation programme as if it's just the bit we do with KPMG and Agilysys, the strategic implementation partner, but that's one of three. So the organisational design, this is the work that we're doing with KPMG and Agilysys. It's looking at the new operating model, the new organisational design, making some really significant changes to the way we work. So, for example, looking up at setting up a procurement and commissioning centre of excellence and having commissioning and procurement done there rather than in every one of the services where you get commissioning officers, but they don't have the degree of expertise, don't have the career profile, etc. Looking at our comms team and bringing all of our comms into the comms marketing and comms team rather than having comms officers in each of the functions. So you get a better professional service as a result. Lawyers all being in the legal team rather than being in services, for example. So that's service design. That was driving out a large amount of the savings, both in terms of people, and you remember the target about 500 jobs reduction as a result of this, but also the third-party spend programme, where next year alone we're looking at £10 million reduction in third-party spend as a result of those efficiencies. The second theme we are not working with KPMG on, we worked with Corn Ferry originally. This is the pay and reward programme. This is looking at how do we harmonise pay and terms and conditions and benefits for all of our staff that came from those four preceding councils. Again, just to remind members, a much more complex environment than any other council has had. If you look at what Dorset had, for example, Dorset County Council terms and conditions were effectively in place for all of their social workers, children's social workers, education, strategic highways, and they've therefore used those T's and C's, terms and conditions, for the rest of the staff that came in from the districts. We have Hull terms and conditions, Bournemouth terms and conditions, Christchurch terms and conditions, and Dorset County terms and conditions. This is the programme to get those all harmonised. That has taken longer than we would have liked, and some would say, I'm sure, longer than it should have done, but we think we have a plan now to bring that in over the next 12 months to unify a pay and grading structure and, more importantly, alongside that, modernisation of the terms and conditions on which people are employed and the reward that goes with that. So a complete package. Now, Sarah Radine is leading that internally as a theme. And then the third thing is where and how we work. And you've seen the outcome of some of that if you've been into the BCP Civic Centre, as it now is, Bournemouth Town Hall as was, to see, particularly in the extension, new ways of working, open plan, everybody working paper-free, much more professional environment, more positive environment, and actually a number of people who thought they couldn't work that way now saying, actually, this is really great. It's a professional way of working. And the improvement team, sorry, the peer review team that were with us today, actually I had comments from them saying it was the best they've seen of modern council office infrastructure. in terms of working environment and the facilities that were there. So good support for that. But that's the third stream of work. It's where and how we work. So transformation program, when I talk about it, covers all three of those elements. Often when we talk about it in shorthand, we dive just to the top one, the organisational design, and talk about the work we're doing with our strategic improvement partner. Important though that is, it isn't the whole program, and it's important that we remember that. What have we achieved so far? I'm not going to go through this slide in detail because I've got another one that's perhaps in plainer language, but we have done a lot of the fundamentals, and on the risk register that we bring to you every quarter, we recognise that we're in a new stage now. We've designed the architecture, we've designed the systems. This is now the time when we have to implement, and we have to continue to implement the change and drive out the savings as a result of the investment that we're putting in. And that's really what the risk focus is on now, because the system architecture, are we going to have a CRM system? Are we going to have an ERP? Those questions have been asked, and they're in the process of being implemented and being delivered. We do have a set of values. We do have a set of behaviours. We haven't got those necessarily inculcated into everybody, but we have those in place now. And I think the architecture work has been done. And I do want to pay tribute to the work that Julian Hosgathorpe did, because that's what he drove. That's where his skill base was, and he's left us with a really good legacy of that. But if you look at progress on those three key areas, if you like, that I talked about, and unfortunately these are reversed. I should have changed the slide. These are in the other order. But where and how we work, the office accommodation really coming through strongly now. Meeting room capabilities being delivered in the rest of the civic centre, so the civic end of it, if you like, being refurbished at the moment, and that will be open soon. It will give us meeting facilities that we need. We've remodelled the libraries. I think most of you will be aware now we've reopened Christchurch Library and Poole Library with new facilities in. Poole Library has got something like 90 touchdown spaces of an equivalent standard of we've got in the offices here. And we're also looking at what we can do in Kingston to give us a fourth touchdown area. But the way that we work has fundamentally changed, and that has been very successful, actually. And people have really bought into the Teams operation, Microsoft Office 365, and the way that works. One of the things we have to do now is just modernise the last vestiges of that. So, for example, I keep getting emails with a Word document attached, and people ask for comments. If they put that document onto SharePoint, then I could go into SharePoint, make my comments on there, and they could see them without us sending emails backwards and forwards. If they've got a spreadsheet and they want my views on it, if they put the spreadsheet on SharePoint, I could go into that and amend it without them sending it and waiting for my reply and trying to compare documents. So the next stage is to really modernise the way that we do document processing, and Modern Gov, our democratic system, also gives us that functionality. So really driving then, that's where you get the benefits, that's where you get the efficiencies, is from that extra step. In terms of supporting our colleagues, we've got the new recognition framework in place. Our STAR's been very successful. We've got a new process and approach to talent acquisition, talent establishment. So that's, I think, going well. The key thing for us now on that is pay and reward, and that's the big risk area, is just to get pay and reward over the line. And then on the organisational design, the work we're doing with the SIP, we can already see KPMG are beginning to move back. We're seeing skills transfer. We're seeing people within the organisation taking responsibility for those changes. And I think we do have the foundations in place for those new technology platforms, more of which in a second. So we can see progress. We can also see, and I haven't done the exact number, but something like £8 million of savings already been made directly through transformation, in addition to the 37 million or so through bringing the four preceding councils together. So we can already begin to see some of those financial benefits coming through. I think what I'd like to do, if I ask Katie to talk us through the customer relationship and the data processes, and then I'll pick up the ERP system first I can, and we'll bring it back together.
Thanks very much, Graham. Do a little bit of detail on the new customer platform. Obviously, the first thing we did was to look at where we are now. So looking at our pain points, we've actually got multiple front doors, the way in which our customers contact us, which means that their experience is inconsistent and impersonal. They have difficulty finding information for themselves on the website and in other places, which essentially means that they can't solve issues for themselves, and self-service isn't easily or readily available. And that creates unnecessary demand into the contact centre and on our service lines. We've also got no idea what one service area has said to another service area and how they've particularly dealt with a customer that's made an inquiry. And we're completely reactive in the way in which we deal with our customers. We wait to be made aware of issues. So across the organisation, we've probably got several incomplete pictures of me potentially as a customer of BCP. So what we aim to do with implementing this new customer platform is to address some of those really fundamental issues that we've got. So we need to make sure that we've got a more connected organisation and a connected view of our customer, our businesses and our data, so that we can use this information that we gather to actually learn and improve from that, so that we can get faster resolution of issues online via self-service where possible. So that leaves time for a richer conversation with our customers that have more complex needs. This then puts less pressure on our scarce resources, and we're reducing the amount of failure demand, i.e. demand that could be dealt with elsewhere, into the customer services centre, which means that we're more available to deal with our most vulnerable customers. So moving on, what might that look like? So this is, you don't need to, it might be a little bit shadowy in that room, but essentially this is potentially a picture of what any agent in the customer contact centre might see. So we've got a customer that's contacted called Tom Hiddleston, and what the advisor can see is the relevant information about Tom, all of the interactions that Tom has had with us previously. So we might be able to update him on how his building control inquiry might have gone. So we've got up-to-date information on Tom's inquiries. We can also see on the right-hand side that it highlights that he's potentially a vulnerable customer, English isn't his first language, and he's got mobility issues. Now, that kind of information about Tom helps the advisor to deal with Tom as an individual, so that they can tailor the call and how it's dealt with and take the most appropriate course of action. Now, this enables us to make sure that each contact is actually an ongoing conversation and a relationship, and not starting that conversation every time anyone makes contact with a contact centre. And there's so much flexibility within the system that actually the service areas will also have their dashboard view of their own services, because all it's doing is taking a different lens on the same set of data, so that we can get better information to the service areas as well. So just building on that, if we're thinking about our data and insights, in terms of what we've got at the moment, we've got a huge amount of siloed information and data. It tends to be it's my data rather than it's BCP data that's an asset for the organisation. We've also got quite a lot of poor quality data, which we do need to address. Now, that can be understandable at some points, because a lot of data is collected at the point of entry, and that may well be where we're dealing with a vulnerable client or a family in crisis. The officer is the last thing they're going to do in that situation is, can I just check your postcode, please? So there are reasons why we do have some poor quality data issues, but we do need to get better at that. We've got lots of off-system data, hundreds of spreadsheets and unstructured data, which means that it's not pooled in one place, and we can't gather intelligence from it. We've got lots of time-consuming manual manipulation of data. So looking at all of those different individual spreadsheets, manipulating them at the end of a month, potentially a team of people taking 2 or 3 weeks to manipulate that and present information back to the management in terms of how things have progressed, which means that we've got no real or near time information. We're always looking backwards, at least 6 weeks behind where we might want to be. We've got limited what we call dashboard reporting using kind of Power BI, nice interface graphics that you'll see examples of a little bit later, but where we do have it, people really like it and find that it helps them to improve their services because of the way in which it's presented helps them to ask better questions about what they're seeing. And because of all of that, we don't really have very good or any cross-organisational insights, which I hope you'll see as we go on to the next set of information. So this is a mock-up of what we could see from the data platform. So the initial build of the platform's underway using Microsoft, and we're using it in conjunction with what we call master data management software. Now, that software enables us to match data from various different sources, different systems. So, for example, to generate a true view of the citizen or our customers. So me, for example, I could be known to BCP in 3 very different systems, and my information could have been collected in 3 different ways. So I'll be known to you in the council tax system, electoral registration, and potentially green waste. And I might be known as Katie Lacey, K.Lacey, or Katie Lacey without the I or the E in the surname. So what we're doing is we're not copying data and keeping it into another place. We're actually matching the data so that you know that when I call up, I am Katie Lacey, even though I'm registered slightly differently in different systems. Where necessary, we can anonymise that data, and we can also enhance it, as we've done here, by adding mapping information using the gazetteer and then presenting it back in any number of different lenses, which you'll see. So there is a little bit of a health warning. Obviously, the effectiveness of any data platform is only going to be as good as the quality of the data that we have in the source systems, which is why it's important that we address that. So this, sorry, Graham, if you just go back to that citizen view. So that citizen view about our population is being mastered from all of those systems, from social care, housing, education, and the gazetteer. So we'll be able to see our demographic through a range of indicators, so we can see which household might be in receipt of one-off grants or rebates, for example. At a point in time, we might be able to overlay flood risk indicators for the elderly with mobility issues so that we can see where they are. And obviously we can drill down and zoom in, as you can see across the top, looking across our region via any ward, street or property. So if we go on to the next example, this is synthetic data, I have to say, because we're not actually dealing with providing services in Bristol. But what this example shows you is where we can link together the relationships between people, their properties, the services that they're taking from BCP, and the suppliers of those services. So how might we use that in our context? We might be able to use that information in terms of supporting families. Controversially, maybe we might be able to look at it from a fraud perspective in terms of where we know that 2 people are present in a property, but they might be claiming single person discount. So there's lots of applications that we could use in order to improve our services using this lens of the data. So flipping on to the next one, this screen shows a service overview from a perspective of financial performance. So we'll be able to use the data that we connect from the new financial platform, the ERP system, and we might be able to look at, in this example, a monthly run rate against our budget or target income that we might have set for any particular area. And so we can look at any particular service area, or potentially how our resort has performed, potentially over a bank holiday weekend, where we can see how many parking tickets might have been issued, or how many what the expenditure income has been in some of our concessions. So if we look at the next one, this screen is more of a operational service performance. So that would be pulling data from multiple sources or multiple contact channels about where incidents of any particular type are happening in our conurbation. So in this example, obviously it's missed bins. You can see that from the graph that we've had a spike in the number of missed bins that we've got in a particular area. but that could be used for any services to look at that. It could be graffiti or antisocial behaviour. So providing we've got good quality data in those source systems, presenting it back like this to those service areas helps them to think about how they're managing their services and where we might need to target some more support. So this next screen is around a supplier overview. So we could view our suppliers from where they're based locally. We can look about how much monthly spend we're spending with them. And also we could add on top of that regulatory information or assessment data. So we could see what the CQC rating might be of anything, or we might have the Ofsted rating if we had a schools view, for example. So all of those screens are all connected in terms of the linkages from the underlying data and then integrated into that one common data platform so that we can present those back using any number of lenses that are appropriate to the people that we would be wanting to view that information. So we've got that single point of council-wide connected insight. Clearly, there's a huge amount of high security around who can see what, and that's tied to the role profiles of people that would be accessing the system. We get a single and consistent view of the customer, aligning our data and mastering it across multiple systems. And we'll be able to connect the data that we have from Dynamics, what's called Finance and Operations, or the ERP system, from the customer engagement system and any line of business systems that we've got, so that we can start to understand the relationships between our customers, the services that they receive, and potentially the suppliers providing those services. And like other systems, there'll be no need to log in again. So for all users of this, it makes it very straightforward. So we have got now the initial build of that platform. So we have got a single view of the customer mastered from those 11 data sets. We haven't put that live yet because we need the other elements of the transformation program to come on stream. And once we've done that, because we've got a data and insights team, Centre of Excellence, we will continue to build out and make sure that we can get richer and deeper insights across our data, the more data that we can put into that one common data platform, so that we can get that rich information and presentation of information, as you've seen from those screens.
Thanks, Katie. I hope that was helpful to members in showing the potential functionality. The risks in that are twofold, I guess. One is the implementation risk, so cost, resources, etc., to implement. But actually, we're making really good progress on those. And the reason I'm going to talk about the enterprise resource platform in a bit more detail is it will show you the risk management that we're doing in the program management in order to deliver all three of these. The other risk is not delivering those means that we can't deliver the efficiencies of transformation. That you can see, I think, how that single customer view will save a lot of time and energy and heat and light when we get it wrong. Because actually, if you've got a single customer view and you've got that database there, it'll be a much better transaction with the individual. And also, as we do that, we'll get much better intelligence and we'll be able to target and focus our services better. So that data platform in particular will give us the mechanism to really focus our services and be really clear with members about the options and the possibilities and the priorities within those services. The third area then is the enterprise resource platform. So this is the sort of the backbone of the organisation, if you like. It's a finance system and an HR system that link, that connect budget to people, expenditure. It should give a really modern approach, will allow proper commitment accounting. So when you place an order and you've got milestone dates for delivery and likely spend, that will fit into the revenue profile. We'll be able to see what our future spend is going to be. We don't have some of those systems at the moment. So to give you some assurance, there is a complex, and this is the plan on a page, POAP, if people don't know POAP, and I didn't when I first saw this, so I Googled it, and it turns out it's plan on a page. So I could cope with that. But this is the plan on a page for delivering the enterprise resource platform and looking at the different work packages. There's a bit that's worryingly red in there, which is the integration build and IT rationalisation. So we're aware of the risks, we're looking at that. Some amber, so there's some risk in there. Also, quite a lot that is blue, and blue is complete, and green is it's on track. So actually, I've got a lot of assurance about what's gone on. It's the technology slice in the middle that we have concerns about. We're having a really focused discussion about that at the moment. But I wanted to show it to you, warts and all. This is the absolute latest version that we only got last week, I think, updated. And the reason I draw attention to it was this, the one in the middle that's red was amber last week. So it has gone red. So we're now looking at putting more resource into resolving that. But the plan is for this system to go live on the 1st of April. We need to define what we mean by live, because there's a core system, which is a new chart of accounts, a new accounting process linked to HR, and an HR record of all the people we employ. And then there's a whole load of other functionality that might follow 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, up to 6 months later. We know there's one package that we'll be bringing in about 6 months later. So it's a plan to deliver it, but it is a fundamental change to the way we manage our budgets. At the moment, we do not have good, up-to-date, real-time budget information available to budget managers. They rely on finance to give them access and give them information, and we're still trying to bring together 3 sets. So, you know, the finance team do a fantastic job of making that look seamless, but behind the scenes, I think they're not just, you know, paddling like swans paddle. I think they're working really, really hard to keep the information flowing, and it's much more complex than it needs to be. This new ERP system will give us that simplicity. What have we got at the moment? Not to put too fine a point on it, 2 different HR systems. They've each got different logins. It's the same login screen, but I have to go in as, without giving too many secrets away, Farrant GR for people that are on the former Bournemouth scheme, and G Farrant for people that are on the pool scheme. So I have to come in and go out to approve leave for my management team. I'm constantly going in and out, forgetting the passwords on 2 different systems that are identical systems. The finance system is a single system, but there's 2 debtor systems. Our hierarchies are out of date, so that it doesn't show the actual reporting lines. So if a manager moves a team from, or we move a team from one manager to another, we haven't got that updated. It's a very intensive process. The new ERP system will allow us to do that on the same day. I won't go through all the pain points, but suffice it to say that just about everybody that's come here from outside has said, actually, the system needs to be modernised. Those that are within the organisation said, well, we live with it, but actually we could modernise it and really simplify the way that we work and the information on our people. So things like no access to centralised job descriptions, no access to centralised advertising. We write an advert for each job when we produce it. There's nothing to draw off the shelf. So this system will give us that sort of ability. We don't capture what competences and skills people have got. So we're almost certainly underutilising the staff that we've got in terms of the skills that they have available. The gain points are really to try and reverse all of that, get live budget information. If you create a new post, it will show immediately on the system rather than have to wait for the updates. Team and DIR information will be in one place. Workforce data will be at our fingertips. If I ask now, how many people have we got earning between, I don't know, 27,000 and 29,000, that's a difficult question. I should be able to run that sort of work myself. If we want to know what's the average salary and how does that compare with the pay rise, we ought to be able to run those sorts of queries immediately and get that information. So again, I won't go through the detail, but a huge shift forward. And then it will be a much more modern system that will give us the workforce data that we need to really manage this organisation in a different way. And we simply can't get that at the pace that we need it at the moment. You would not believe how many requests we get for workforce data, whether it's how many people do you employ, how many people do you employ in this area, or government saying to us, how many environmental health officers have you got? How many qualified EHS, how many training standards officers? And at the moment, they're all manual queries. We should be able to answer those automatically. We will have up-to-date budget information that will be available in clean, easy to access, manager-friendly screens. So again, a lot of this emphasis will go down to the managers to manage their own budgets, but I do expect managers to manage their budgets. That's what they're here for and what they're paid for. This gives us the facility to do that. At the moment, too many managers say, I'm waiting for information for, or I can't see it in my own time. And this is an example where at the moment to raise a request for a new job, a new post, so we've deleted the job, we've changed the job, we've got a new job. It's a very manual process. It goes through a number of systems. Here it will be a single manager-led process that they can do online themselves with various degrees of authority. So it might have to go through authorizations, but you'll get an email or a notification to say there's something to do on the system. and be able to do that much more quickly. Online onboarding checklists, so that when we have a new employee, have they had their full induction? Have they attended the mandatory training courses? Are there things that they need to do before they're fully functional? And as a manager, you'll be able to see that at a glance. So as I say, we have really strong project management. This is the same plan on the page, but with the stage gates. So at what point do we go or no go? How are we making those decisions? Because of course there is risk in making all of those decisions to proceed to the next stage, and we're managing that risk as tightly as we can. So I'm hoping that gives you confidence about the way we're managing the risks, because each system change carries a risk, but equally staying static carries risk, because you get overtaken and systems come out of date. So for example, the Selena, I think it's Selena, is it the HR system, which has now been bought by Access. We're having problems accessing the information off of that system because there was one expert and he appears to have sadly passed away very recently. So they're now struggling to get the expertise that we need to get access to the data that we need to do the update. So, you know, you have single points of failure. This new system should help us to move beyond those. Just to be really clear, we're also managing risk logs on everything. So this is the ERP risk log. So the third-party interfaces and the environments and infrastructure for testing, lack of our capacity, the data migration load. So we're mapping all of those, looking at what's the recovery plan and which stage gate does that appear. So we've got a comprehensive risk log on those. And we've got program level risk as well that we're managing. So we're managing it at a range of different levels. So we have the overall transformation program, corporate risk that comes here. We have a program level risk, and then we have project level risks as well. So we're managing it as tightly as we can. And then just to say a bit about the financial risk, because I'm sure there's a bit of interest to Audit Governance Committee. And all I've done here are some headings to talk about, but effectively the transformation program is being funded in a number of ways. You know, to state the obvious, if you like, capital costs, things that are actual capital expenditure, are charged to capital. Because you buy a bit of IT, it has a 5-year life, you write that off over 5 years. So where we can, of course, we're charging this capital. The vast majority of our transformation costs, though, are revenue costs. And you can only really fund that in, well, we've got 3 ways as it happens. So there's the normal revenue budget. You can make provision in your budget to fund transformation out of revenue, but revenue is quite tight at the moment. And that does include the use of reserves as one-off. And normally you would try and use reserves if you had to fund it that way. The other, which we've had a lot of conversation about in this council, is the flexible use of capital receipts. And that's where government has said, if you sell an asset and you generate a capital receipt, then you can use that to fund the revenue costs of transformation. And that is unusual, because normally government wouldn't allow you to use capital receipts to fund revenue costs. But there's a particular piece, the flexible use of capital receipts, that allows you to do that. But the but is, those costs have to meet the government's definition of transformation, not the council's. And there is a slight difference. So, for example, on redundancy, as I understand it, the flexible use of capital receipts allows you to fund the statutory costs of redundancy from capital receipts, but not the discretionary costs of redundancy. So there's still a revenue burden. So there's a slight constraint within that. The third is a sort of a less generally used option, but is one that this council has available to it, which is the use of a capitalisation direction. And this is where government, under the exceptional financial support mechanism, is minded to, and said it's minded to give us permission to borrow £20 million this year to fund the transformation programme, effectively to fill the hole that was caused as a result of them changing the flexible use capital receipt rules around the Beach Hut programme, which members are fully aware of. That actually has greater flexibility regarding what you can charge to it, because you can effectively charge to it what government allows you to charge to it. So there might be more flexibility within that. But there is a condition to that, and one of the conditions is that we have a governance review. We have indicated to government that they should proceed with that governance review in order to make sure the capitalisation direction is in place. But the preferred financial mechanism for the council, as stated at the moment, is put the capitalisation direction in place, but try not to draw it down, try to sell assets during this financial year in order to fund the transformation programme. So that's what we're doing. Members will know we've got paper coming through Cabinet and on to the next council meeting which identify some assets to sell. Subject to the council agreeing those, then we will, if we can, sell those assets before 31st of March and then use the capital receipt under the flexible use of capital receipts regulations, use those to fund the transformation programme. Any gap, any shortfall, to reassure members in terms of risk management, we will apply the capitalisation direction to that. So we have some confidence that we have a method of funding the transformation programme in this year, despite the hiccups that we went through during June, July, August or so in terms of the government's change of the flexible use of capital receipts rules. So again, I would say this is a bit of proper corporate risk management. We have a direction that's set, but we have a fallback position that we will use if we need to. The other big risk, of course, is the cost base and whether the cost of transformation varies. We are having conversations at the moment about how much we can charge to transformation, and we will charge what we can to transformation and then use these mechanisms to fund that. That is variable depending on, for example, if we have a post that's being used for transformation, but then we backfill, you can't charge the cost of backfilling to transformation, of course, because that's a normal cost. So I know we're going through those numbers at the moment between Adam Richards and the auditor as well. So there's some discussion about that. There's always some variation around that. But that's where we are at the moment. So my sense is that the transformation programme is moving forward appropriately. I think it's a huge programme and it's a complete transformation of the organisation, not just a change in services. But hopefully I've explained that to members and identified where I think those key risks are. I think the assurance I would give you is that absolutely I think we're aware of the risks and we are managing the risks at an appropriate level. So hopefully that's helpful, Chairman, and happy to take any questions around that.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief Executive, and thank you to Katie Lacey online for your presentation as well, which was extremely interesting and useful. Thank you. Remind members of the committee, if we get to financial issues, we've got Adam Richards, Chief Financial Officer, online, so we can call on his input if appropriate at that stage. So members, questions? I've got a few which I'll come to after I've dealt with everybody else's. So Councillor Phipps.
Start off. It's actually about this financing of the transformation programme. That was quite interesting that you gave up the three possibilities or as to the way it could be financed. And obviously the 22-23 budget does show that there would be capital receipts for sale of assets of about 61 million, something like that. It's in one of the lines overall. But presumably there's going to be a loss of revenue for those assets when they're sold. I did ask a question of financial officer. His assistant came back to me that the loss of revenue can be about £1 million. I don't see where that is shown anywhere as a cost in here. It's a bit like if you're borrowing money and you're paying interest. So where is that? And also that sort of loss of revenue for about 61 million doesn't seem actually to be very much. If you're selling the assets, presumably somebody who's buying them might want to earn more than that on that amount of asset. So do you think we've got the sale of the assets right in that respect? And where is the loss of revenue shown against this within here? That's the first question. So I'm just looking at the risk of that, and also the risk that you might not even sell the assets, or you might actually sell them for less, and the risk that you've got the loss of income that isn't shown. So those are the risks there, and I do have more, but whether you want to do one at a time.
I think, given the number of questions within the question, it's better to do it one at a time, actually. And would that be best done, Chief Executive, by you or by Mr. Richards?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it first off, and then bring Mr. Richards in if that's helpful. Just,
yes, absolutely. And I think perhaps you might want to round that off by the question that Councillor Phipps didn't ask, which is that if we find that we can't sell an asset within the time frame, what happens next? Because our valuation might not be the same as a potential purchaser.
I mean, just in round terms, so we have identified some potential assets that will come to the council for approval to dispose. In looking at that, we will be providing you with the revenue loss and the likely capital value. So you will be able to work out what the yield is, whether that yield is appropriate. So we will be providing councillors with all of that information at the time when you're being asked to make those decisions. So the reassurance is for this financial year, we have the capitalisation direction as a fallback. So if we didn't sell any assets other than the ones that are already programmed, then we would need to draw down the capitalisation direction. You as councillors have the option to make that decision, and you will be provided with all of that information at the time. I'll leave it to Mr. Richards to talk perhaps in more detail about how we've built that into the medium-term financial plan, or how we would build that into the medium-term financial plan during that period, if that's helpful.
So, Mr. Richards, are you able to join us?
I am, Chair.
Good evening.
And
Welcome.
welcome. And for the purposes of tape, my name is Adam Richards. I'm the Council's Chief Financial Officer. In regards to the query from Councillor Phipps, with regards to £61 million, the first thing to highlight is that that is a mixture of assets that are generating income from the council, or net income for the council, and other assets that we no longer need, and have previously, in some years, we're going back 3 or 4 years now, identified them as surplus and available for sale. And it's a mixture of those two that make up that £61 million. What gets a lot of attention is the current additional assets that are being put forward to January council, because those are deemed non-strategic assets, and in that is assets that are generating, if you like, a previous commercial investments that are generating a current net return for the council. And as the chief execs highlight, the revenue implications of that are set out as part of that confidential appendix, and they are factored into the council's current medium-term financial plan that is provided to Cabinet on a monthly basis. Hopefully that helps answer the question, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richards. Did you want to go to your next question, Councillor Phipps?
Can do. Could I just be clear that the loss of income then is factored in to the medium-term financial plan? Is that what you said? Sorry, I was looking at the screen and actually it looks on in sync with it, and it was. I just want to be clear that that's what you said.
Yeah, it is, in the sense that the net income that we generate from those new asset disposals that have been put forward to council have been factored into the medium-term financial plan based on an assumed date of sale. And clearly, as we recognise, there are risks associated with that, and we'll have to carefully monitor it through that process on an ongoing basis.
I just don't know where they are in the medium-term financial plan, so I think it would be helpful at some point to show us where it is, because I've had a good look at it and I haven't seen them. But thank you very much for that.
Can you help us on that, Mr. Richards, or do you want to do that outside of the meeting by email?
Well, I owe Councillor Phipps a response to a rather detailed inquiry around transformation. We've already been around it several times. I do find that her questions really helpful and insightful in actually helping to pitch anything that I include in the medium-term financial plan reports at the right level. So, I do welcome that, but I do owe the councillor a response, and I suggest I include it in that response.
Good idea. Thank you. Councillor Phipps.
Okay, sorry. Collapse this and go to the next one. Yeah, the next one I sort of identified as a risk, and I think you've come up with this, and you know it's a risk, is that so far the transformation programme has cost about 46 million more than originally intended at this point. So what will it cost the council in further delays in actual money terms? If you've talked about delivery already and you've identified that, but let's say the programme slips by another 6 months, and if you look in the finances and you look at the annual savings, if it slips 6 months in 23-24, you've got half of 18 38.7 million, and 24-25 half of 43.9 million. It's like 6 months. Is that how it works? Is it cumulative? I mean, this is quite a huge risk because at the moment it's already slipped in a way. We've already lost, you know, we're behind. So can you actually stick to this delivery? And on the risk of slippage, to me, looks quite huge. So if you'd like to comment on that, thank you.
Chief Executive.
Yeah, I mean, there is significant risk if it were to slip. We have to manage the programme to deliver against those targets. So it's interesting whether you think that the medium-term financial plan is driving the savings or whether the transformation programme is driving the savings. And the honest answer is we did some work in 2019. We looked at the scope of what we thought could be saved out of the organisations. As a result of that work, that came forward with some numbers, which we brought to members, and members have taken the true at the higher end, but we've baked that into the medium-term financial plan since then. We have to deliver those now. You know, in the sense we have to make sure we are putting all of our effort now into delivery. I don't think the programme to date has been as focused on delivery because we've had to get the architecture right. Now we've got the architecture right, we absolutely have to deliver, and then we have to collectively through Corporate Management Board drive out those savings. Most of the staffing savings are from April 24, so we have 12-15 months to prepare for those, but that means we have to start preparing for them now. We can't wait until March 24 to prepare the ground. So the whole system service redesign that I showed you on the right hand side, that line of things going further back that ended up with etc., which I was taught by my chemistry teacher, stands for extraordinary thought collapse, because you've got to the point where you can't think of anything else. And extraordinary thought collapse is good. But actually remodelling all of our services to drive out those savings is the piece that we have to do now. So working with members, the Corporate Management Board, the service directors have to now do that process. That's where we are. If we don't achieve it, then something else has to give. And in a constrained revenue environment, services will have to give. None of us want that as an outcome because we all believe in providing the highest quality of public service that we can. So, you know, that's where we are. We have to drive those savings through. So that wasn't a factual answer, it was, but that's where we are.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Bragg.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The first one, I've got one around the finances, which we'll come back to, but just talking about the risks of what we're aiming to deliver. I noticed in the presentation there about the system and the sort of one overall view of a customer or resident and all the sort of contact they have with the council and the services. And I can see some benefits, you know, the obviously benefits of that and the sort of efficiencies we get. So local authorities aren't a sort of business, aren't an enterprise as such. We're a sort of creature of statute. You know, the Local Government Act places lots of responsibilities on local authorities to deliver a whole range of services, and often they're totally unrelated. You know, there's no relevance in knowing that, you know, a resident is a taxi driver, but also is a, you know, they've got children in social care or whatever. There's no sort of linkage and no sort of benefit in knowing sort of links like that. So it was mentioned that there were risks in bringing all of that information together into one central place that we can access. What if we do have problems in, you know, integrating some of the information about certain of our sort of service areas? Is there a risk that we'll end up having a system that actually provides, I don't know, 3/4 of the view of the customer, but actually there's bits that we've just not managed to link into that, you know, and what will that mean for the benefits of transformation if we can't integrate all of that information?
Chief Executive.
Which, I mean, there is a risk in that, but I'd have to say getting a quarter of view of the customer is better than what we've got at the moment, which is an individual service view of the customer. So there'll be some benefits coming out of that, but I don't know whether I can bring Katie Lacey in to touch a bit more on how we're managing that risk, because the master data management system that we're using and the Microsoft suite is actually, it's quite an open system, so we should be able to link to it. But Katie, do you want to say more about that, Chairman, if I may?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in order to get to where we are now, in terms of creating that single view of the customer. We have already taken feeds from 11 of our key source systems from the electoral register and council tax education, etc. So we have already got that single view of the customer, and we've mastered it across those systems, ready for when the customer contacts us. We've got a rich set of information about a rich view of our customer at that point in time. What we expect to be able to do is to build out as we've got more systems come online. When the finance systems comes online, we'll be able to integrate financial information, i.e. supplier information in there. And when we've got the single planning system, etc., once we've got all of those sorted out in terms of line of business applications, it will become a much richer platform because we can ingest information to it and then apply those lenses as we wish. For example, we could also, with agreement with partners, ingest information from health services or police services or other community activities in order to do what we might consider in terms of predictive analytics. So somebody who may present in one set of circumstances, you could map it out and say, typically once they've done that, we now understand that their journey might look like this, so that we can apply that insight going forward. So there is a risk that we might not be able to ingest all of the information that we might want to, or we might not have permissions to do that, but that's going to have to be on a case by case basis as we go through each of those.
Did you have another question, Councillor Brown?
Yes,
I think you said it was a finance question.
Yeah. Thanks for that answer. Actually, that does sort of help clarify the sort of level of risk we've got around that area. Just on the finance, going back to what was said about where we're identifying assets to sell to fund the transformation, and those proposed assets for sale will be told about the capital value and the revenue loss as well of selling those assets. I understand that some of those assets that are looking to be sold, they were initially acquired using prudential borrowing or using some kind of borrowing. Will we also be, but that borrowing actually won't necessarily be paid off when we sell those assets, so the assets will be sold, the council will no longer have that asset, but we will still have the debt on the books that was initially taken out to fund those assets, and we will be paying that for many years to come. So for those assets for sale, will we also be told what the ongoing debt servicing costs will be that was initially incurred for those assets?
Mr. Richards, would you like to take that one, please?
Yes, Chair. I'd reference Councillor Brown to the report, because I think the November Cabinet report, including the confidential information, includes the information that is generally requested, because it actually compares the cost of the debt option with the consequences of the sale option, and that's set out within the report and within the confidential appendix. The point I would, however, make to Councillor Brown is you're absolutely right in the sense that we will be selling these assets, but we will be retaining the debt. And to highlight, when it comes to actually when the predecessor councils acquired those assets, they didn't take out specific debt associated with those acquisitions. The actual taking on of debt was associated with their treasury management policy. So they adopted, when we do capital schemes, when we do acquisitions, we don't necessarily, go out and take on a loan directly associated with that activity. We take on debt looking at the overall finances of the council, including its reserves, including its day-to-day cash balances, reflecting on things like the government grants that we've got. We look at it from a treasury management perspective. That drives when we take loans, not necessarily individual capital schemes, individual capital projects, and individual acquisitions as part of that. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. It does make sense that if we acquire an asset, we don't necessarily have, let's say, a mortgage linked to that asset asset is secured on, so we can't sort of necessarily identify it specifically. But that doesn't quell my concerns about the fact that we will be selling assets to fund transformation, but retaining debt on the books somewhere that residents will be paying for decades to come.
That of course presupposes, the likely sale price, doesn't it? And we don't know that because we're not into that territory yet. But I'll bring the Chief Executive in to add to that response. Chief Executive.
Thank you. Just to add that, of course, the revenue savings that we make through transformation will also be of benefit to the council taxpayer for the entire future. So if we save, let's just take a round figure, if we save the £44 million in total that we've predicted through this, then the council will be £44 million a year to run cheaper forever. So there is a trade-off in that. That's the trade-off that members are effectively being asked to review whenever we're looking at the cost of transformation against the benefit of transformation. And the cost must include, as Councillor Brown's pointed out, if you like, not only the direct cost that we're paying, but also the revenue loss from, or the yield loss from the investment that we're selling if we're using the sales to raise the capital, and the debt that might have been associated with that. So we get that, but I would just urge members to look in the round at the entire picture, because the revenue savings are quite significant for the council.
And I'm assuming, Chief Executive and Mr. Richards, that when we get to that stage, that will be set out clearly in a paper so that all of those issues can be balanced in the minds of members to make that decision. I have online, we have Councillor Howell, who's a member of this committee, who wants to ask a question. Are you there, Councillor Howell?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to ask your question? Is it to the Chief Executive, do you think, or is it to Mr. Richards?
It's to both, actually. There's a couple of questions. Firstly, just a clarification on Councillor Brown's point there. In relation to what Adam said, it's certainly not my impression that we just essentially borrow in a general perspective, because when we have papers like Carter's Key come forward, they include in them the current borrowing costs. So there's certainly, when councillors are making decisions, they're guided in those decisions by information that's supplied by the finance team as to the current cost of borrowing.
Yeah, if I can come in, Chair, Councillor's right in the sense that, when we actually look at capital, look at, potentially undertaking potential borrowing schemes as part of a robust business case being presented to councillors to enable them to make informed decisions, we tend to use two interest rates within those reports. One is the prevailing PWLP rate for the length of the assets that we are looking to acquire or use. And the other is, if you like, our internal benchmark rates, so that we can actually get a feel as to what the potential difference between the two is and what potential interest rate exposure, we might be taking as part of that. It's standard decision-making kind of techniques. But then when we come to actually undertake that debt, we might not do it the day that we acquire the asset, because we might actually have government grants be made available to us. We might have current reserves made available to us, which we could use first, rather than just go ahead and take the debt. Because what we try to do with debt is we take it not necessarily, and that won't necessarily be when you actually acquire the asset. For example, we could have been taking on debt recently between 4 and 5%, but the last debt we took on was last August when it was 1.5%. It's all about trying to take on the debt that the council needs at the right time, and that's not necessarily you want to take on or buy that asset, and it's trying to get that balance, and that's a little bit of an art form as part of that overall process.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. So, Councillor Howell, to your questions, please.
Yes. Firstly, I don't believe I've yet had a response from Adam or the Chief Executive in relation to the question on transformation. I asked at the the last meeting that they couldn't answer at the time, which was what is, the fact that I understand that licensing fees that are being incurred in relation to the new software that's required to manage these systems is not included in calculating the savings line item in the council reports. I said last time that essentially savings are being artificially inflated because they're not including the cost of these license fees, and I didn't receive an answer last time because I was told I was going to get an answer, but I don't believe that I've yet been sent one. Thanks.
Mr. Richards or Chief Exec? Mr. Richards, could you take that one, please?
Yeah, Chair, to be honest, I don't remember the question from Councillor Howe, but that said, picking up the conversation with Councillor Phipps earlier, Councillor Phipps, I think, and her questions have been very insightful, as I said, with regards to trying to make sure that we're including in cabinet reports when we're reflecting on the transformation programme, making sure that we're including all the relevant elements. That dialogue with Councillor Phipps, we put in something within the I think it was the October cabinet report. Might have been the November one. I'm losing track because they're monthly. But within that report, we put in some key assumptions, and in that we put a section on transformation. Within that table was the detail of the licenses and revenue costs associated with that investment, the additional licensing and costs. And when we consistently bring that stuff forward and those table forwards, for example, as part of the final budget report, we'll be including it again, at that time. So it's almost, we're starting to develop almost a standard template that we'll keep running and keep producing so that people can get familiar with it. And, as I said, I think I found that dialogue with Councillor Phipps helpful in shaping that.
So I'm surprised you don't remember. I'm sure the Chief Executive remembers. I did. If you remember, Adam, I did volunteer to send you the emails that you'd previously sent to me on this subject, and you said that wasn't necessary because you obviously had them on your computer. So, I'm a bit disappointed that nothing's been followed up on that. I'm sure other committee members can remember as well, but I did ask that question, and people can go back and look at the video and find it.
Well, Councillor Howe, if I may, the information has been made available as part of the cabinet report, the monthly financial strategy update report, which included an appendix on key assumptions and a very clear, and the information is included within.
Well,
so it's made available in the public domain.
Yeah, I asked the question. You said you'd get back to me. I don't want to go around the houses to try and determine it from some other source. I'd like a response to the question because I still am unsure the way you've answered the question whether the line items of savings, which I think for this year was it next year £7 million or so, whether that actually includes the costs of the licenses that we will be paying for.
We very clearly set out, within that table, within the medium-term financial plan, the additional costs of licenses that we'll be paying for as a result of this investment, and that's, as I said, all in the public domain, but I can quite happily send it to you, Councillor Howe.
Yeah, so that again is not answering my question. What the information I'd like you to send me is whether the savings line in the tables that we supplied, which I think is it £7 million this year or next year, the anticipated saving, £7 or £8 million?
The saving this year is I think it's 7.5 million this year, is it? And then it's going up by an extra 10 million, something like that.
Yeah. So I want to know whether the licenses that we are paying for as part of transformation are set against included in that figure.
No, they're not. They're separated out, and because the income and saving side of the MTFP, the actual costs is shown on the other side of the MTFP, so they are separated out.
So that eventually we get there. so essentially the savings line is kind of misrepresenting the position to councillors, because people will naturally think that savings include the costs, and actually the savings line does not include all the costs of transformation.
Hence the reason for a table that sets out all the costs, both capital and revenue, one-off costs to deliver the programme, then a table that sets out all the individual ongoing costs, the licensing, for example, that you reference, and then a section that identifies the savings. And all of those, was what was included within that that report. So Cabinet have made a commitment to provide, as part of the MTFP report and on an ongoing basis, so that it's all in that same format and it gives you that overall total picture.
Okay, so and point me to the line which says the actual savings after the costs are taken, ongoing costs are taken account of.
I'll send you the table.
Yeah, thank you. The second question is related to is for the Chief Executive to answer. It is in relation, the Chief Executive said there were two main risks, I think. The third risk, which I would say is the risk of obsolescence, and I'd like to understand what work has been done in trying to understand how the system may degrade over time and become less efficient, as most systems do. And in particular, I understand that we're using a kind of closed platform system with Microsoft, so that wouldn't allow us to be flexible and incorporate new systems from other providers very easily. So I wonder if you could talk around what work has been done in that area. Thank you.
Chief Executive, the issue of obsolescence.
Certainly, I'm going to bow to Katie Lacey's much greater knowledge on this, but certainly the plan for the systems is, first of all, they're not held on premise, they're cloud-based systems, and that does allow the most up-to-date software, and also, just to reassure members, the highest and most stringent security you will get from cloud-based off-premise systems, and that would allow the systems then to be continually updated. And the environment in which we're working actually is one in which we have to move away from the old-fashioned way of buying a system, holding it on-premise on your own hardware and maintaining the software. This is moving into a much more agile and modern workspace. So, Katie, I don't know if sorry, Chair, if I can ask Katie Lacey to come in to give us a bit more of an update, if that's okay with you.
Ms. Lacey, would you like to add to that, please?
Yeah, sure. I think the thing to understand with the way Microsoft at the moment is they've moved into what they call an evergreen environment. So essentially, they don't ever want their products to become obsolete. So they have this evergreen system where it's constantly being developed in the background, and then you get a user view, and then you get a release, and you've got the option to take those releases or not. And we can triage that to say whether that would be useful for BCP to take as it's developed going forward, or whether that's not something that would be useful for BCP to take going forward. It's not something that we're obligated to do unless it's a specific upgrade. So I think the risk of obsolescence in the modern IT platforms that are sat in the cloud are a lot less than they used to be a number of years ago. So I would take comfort from that in terms of using those big Microsoft platforms that they are in that evergreen space. We integrate already. That's part of the work that we're doing with these systems, is to integrate to our line of business applications. So our line of business applications that we use, if they're not in that evergreen space, they will be upgraded when necessary, and we will maintain the integration to those systems. if we choose to change a line of business application to another product or another provider, we will still be able to use what's called APIs to integrate to those line of business applications to either feed in for the financial, to take a feed into the financial system for payments, for example, or take a feed into the data platform for the insight side of things. So I think it probably was an issue a number of years ago, potentially 5-6 years ago, but the way in which it's moving, that's not what I don't think that is a risk.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, there is more flexibility than I imagined in terms of, you know, if a independent software provider comes up with a particular piece of software that is useful for a particular service, you know, we can generally integrate that within our systems.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Chair. Lacey put that very well with regards to the technology side. I actually work in tech myself regards to data, and what you mentioned with APIs, I just hope with Microsoft they have a migration backup system so that all our data is all stored securely and it's backed up regularly. Is that the case with Microsoft 365?
Yeah, absolutely. It all exists in the cloud. So it's within the Azure space where we back up the Microsoft applications into the cloud. We also have our own Azure separate cloud where we back up a number of our other cloud systems. Or indeed, if they're hosted by the provider, then it's backed up within their own cloud. So yeah, we've got quite a comprehensive backup solution.
And one last question, just regards to the security side, and Graham mentioned earlier you have various logins, I want to mention them all. Do we use biometric and facial recognition software for security applications for logging into all these various platforms that you've mentioned tonight?
No, we don't at this particular point in time. My security officer will tell me that that's not necessarily at this point in its development the most secure way to do it. We use what we call two-factor authentication in terms of our security method, one of our security methods, because as you can imagine, there are a number of layers of security that we have into our systems for an organisation this size.
I would expect that, but thank you very much.
And I think, Councillor Phipps, you wanted to come back with another question, did you?
Yeah, I've got one very brief question, I think, to the Chief Executive, and then just a request, really. So the first thing, you did say that this was a fundamental redesign of every single service. That was what you said. Okay. So I just wanted to ask, I am aware of a report coming to Cabinet on the 14th of December. Not that I've seen it, but I'm aware of some of the things in it. And it includes the building of an IT system for a certain department. You'll know which one it is because I've been in communication with you. And I believe the amount is £121,000. So why is that in there? Whereas should that not be in the transformation programme? So that's my question. And then I'll have a request if you want me to just do that at the same time, or which would be to Mr. Richins, or shall I come back on that?
No, I'll deal with the first one first, I think, in that case. Chief Executive.
Thanks, Jim. Very simple answer. When the transformation programme was designed, it included the fundamental systems and the core. It did not include the individual service systems. So we are having to look to fund those separately. That never was part of the original transformation programme as designed and set out. I'm hoping that Katie is nodding to agree that that's right. But that's my understanding. That so, for example, the Mosaic upgrade that's happening in social care is outside of the transformation programme. Transformation programme is the bit at the heart of it, but doesn't include the individual service redesigns, or doesn't include the individual service systems. So.
Thank you, Chief Executive. And you have a request to Mr. Richins.
Okay, so that's the same across the board. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think well, I say it's clear to me. It's not clear to me. I think there's quite a lot of information about the transformation programme that actually isn't really identifiable within the budget papers and the papers that we get coming to us. I find it very difficult to understand a lot of it, to even find the things in there that you really want to find to get the proper picture, financial picture. And what my request is is it possible to produce, whether it's for this committee or whatever, but I think it'd be very helpful, a self-contained financial summary of the transformation programme? I did at one point send you a note about this. It was some while back now. I don't think you ever sort of took up on it or said very much about it. It basically would set out the revenue items and the total of all of those, the cost of financing, things like IT licenses and costs and interest and all sorts of things like that we've discussed tonight. Then the funding, how it's all to be funded, use of reserves, if there are any liabilities, that sort of thing's a funding gap, and overall you should be able to set the whole thing out. I think we need a picture of it. At the moment, it's all in different reports all over the place, a line here, a line there, and you're trying and bring it all out and find it. And I think I used this phrase today in another meeting. It's like walking through quicksand. I don't know how else to say, really, to try and find all this information. I just think it'd be so helpful if we actually had it in one self-contained document for the transformation programme. And that's my request, please. Thank you.
Is that a request that you can respond to, Chief Executive?
I think if I may say, actually, I think that would be a good idea. Can we take that away and find the best mechanism for doing that and for engaging with members on the overall transformation programme going forward?
Yes,
that would be helpful.
It ties in actually with one of the questions I was going to ask, which was actually whether within the constraints of audit and governance, because that's all I can ask within this committee, and I think your questions, Councillor Phipps, are a little bit wider than that, but no less important as a result, was could we have more regular updates? And I certainly, for audit and governance purposes, and looking at corporate risk 13, think that we do need those at this critical time as we go into the delivery stage to get a better understanding by members about those risks. So my request, I think, would be a little more parochial around audit and governance. Could that come through, obviously, in the remainder of our forward plan? That only takes us up to March anyway in this council, but I think that gives an opportunity in January and March, if not February as well, to do that. And you might like to do the takeaway, which is to do something more generally for members across the council.
If I can reflect on the best way to do that and have a conversation with you as chair of the committee outside of this,
that would be ideal. Thank you very much indeed. And for the committee, I will do my best to deliver on that aspiration, because I think it is deliverable. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just have a question just on a slightly different topic. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to spend too long on it, but it was around the section of the presentation about supporting our colleagues and pay and reward strategy, and that it taken longer to do than we wanted to, and there'd been a delay in delivering the consistency of pay and grading and modernisation of terms and conditions. I'm of the view that that delay has caused the loss of some staff, where people are getting fed up having to wait for sort of equal and fair pay and fair terms and conditions with their colleagues. So some of our good staff have sort of voted with their feet and gone. Is there a risk that continuing delay with the pay and reward strategy could be detrimental to our sort of staffing levels and delivering the transformation programme as a result of that?
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. There would be a risk that actually what we're doing now is implementing it as quickly as we can. The actual implementation is a long process, because it involves negotiation with the trade unions. From the trade unions' point of view, they would then want to ballot their workforce. We then get the results of the ballot, and then we'll be implementing. We have to give notice, etc. So I think I would reassure the council that we are now moving at pace as quickly as we can to deliver. We think the delivery to point of implementation is probably about a year. If we can reduce that, then absolutely we will. But we're sort of planning on about a year, because we think it takes that long just for the ballot process and everything else. And we're looking at the whole decision making. Can we accelerate any of those aspects? So we're doing what we can, because I do think we recognise this is the number one issue for the workforce, and therefore it's our number one issue at the moment.
I would agree with you that is the number one issue for the workforce, and I think Councillor Brand has neatly hit the nail on the head. But I do know from experience how long these things take if they're to be done thoroughly and in a world that isn't them to be challenged, which probably will slow the process down at the same time. I'm just in closing on this item, just a quick couple of points, if I may, Chief Executive, probably for you. Within the information coming back to us, I think one of the things that would be helpful to add into there would be around why seemingly the architectural design has taken as long as it has since 2019, if you like, and to make sure that there is a really cogent reason or set of reasons for that being the case, and why delivery is now happening at this stage, because I think there has been a frustration by members and no doubt by officers as well that it has taken longer than would have been ideal. I won't pursue that now, but I think that would be very helpful to get a better understanding. And those communications, I think, could have been improved upon, both at the officer level and at the political level. I'll leave that part of it there for the moment. My other question was one that I would ask about anything in business or in a local authority or any public service that is going through a large period of transformation and change, a really important process, and that is there any directly comparable with other authorities around the transformation programme that we're embarked upon? Are there any that are ahead of us, or any that are just behind us? Are there lessons to be learnt that we're receiving? And is there any, if there is any common learning, are we able to put that to useful change for ourselves, both in terms of cost and in terms of the speed of change?
So that's a really interesting question, and I think the answer is, in terms of, is anybody undergoing this much change in this sort of timescale? I think the answer is no, in terms of comparable authorities, and that's partly because of local government reorganisation and partly because of the ambition that we've set. So the ambition to become, data and insight driven, I haven't seen that expressed quite so directly in any other local authority. The bringing together of 4 preceding councils, I think I said before, this is the most complex bit of local government reorganisation anywhere in the country since the late 1970s, because we are the only council that's had to merge 3 sets of county level services. So adult social care, children, no other council's gone through that. So we have a bigger programme of change. The transformation agenda is, I think we got the timing right, if you like, in terms of ambition, because the technology has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. The off-premise into cloud movement, I think, has given us the ability to do some things that we perhaps wouldn't have been able to do in 2017-18. So I think all of that combined probably gives us the most complex. We are in conversation with a number of other councils about, for example, models of using data and how they're looking at data. So on individual elements, yes, we're in that sort of dialogue. In terms of the whole, I think we probably have one of the most challenging transformation agendas and one of the most ambitious, which is a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing, of course, being that there isn't another council that we can just say, well, we'll do what they've done. But on individual elements, we are looking at that as far as we can.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So, members, I think we've fielded a reasonable number of questions, and I think possibly we've got some outcomes that are going to come back to us later on. Could I thank the Chief Executive and Katie Lacey for their presentations, and from Mr. Richins in terms of his input on the financials. Really appreciated. I'm sure that Fiona Manton, as the facilitator of the risk register, will have picked up on anything. Perhaps if I could ask you, Ms. Manton, to look at Corporate Risk 13 and see whether that is completely fitting with what has come out of this evening. And we'll leave that to your judgment, and you'll no doubt highlight that when you're next presenting Corporate Risk Register to us here at the committee in the future. So, members, can I take us now forward to item 7, which is corporate risk climate change. And in view of the hour, I want to press on with this if we can. We'll be doing this similarly in terms of Jess Gibbons, who's with us this evening, who's the Chief Operations Officer, who I think is going to give us a few opening remarks around the climate change agenda adopted by this council. And then we'll be going to Dr. Matt Montgomery, who's the head of climate action, who's going to give us a brief presentation and then leave it open to members to ask some questions. And the same caveat, if you like, applies to Fiona Manton as far as the facilitator of the risk register is concerned. And Ms Manton, I will bring you in at the end of this item so you can incorporate the two if you have any further comments to make at that stage. So over to you, Ms Gibbons, to do an introduction, some opening remarks for this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I will bring Matt in, who has a presentation to share with you all. But so thank you for inviting us to just share where we are with the climate programme and our ambitions, which you'll know are around moving our council operations to carbon neutral by 2030, and then supporting the wider BCP place to move towards carbon neutral, achieving those ambitions. What we're trying to set out to you this evening is the programme we have, how the governance that we have put in place for that programme, the progress we've made towards those ambitions, and how we're managing the risk of achieving those ambitions. As you'll be aware, climate change, the risks are huge. We are seeking mitigations of those risks and adaptations to those risks as we move forward. And it is about all of us participating in that. So I will invite Matt, if that's okay, Chair, to share his presentation and to talk us through the progress we're making and how we're mitigating some of those risks so far.
Good evening, Dr. Montgomery, and welcome to Audit and Governance Committee. Your presentation, please.
Good evening, Chair. I'm hoping you can see the presentation on your screens right now. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
Okay, excellent. Given the time, I will run through this quite quickly. I just wanted to recap, but Jess has already done so, that we have made a declaration, and that declaration intended us to meet net zero goals of 2030 and 2050, and to maintain climate risks within 2.4 degrees C is the current expected rate of temperature change. But we have to make sure we have an adaptation plan to accommodate that, and potentially going up to 4 degrees C. We do have climate change and tackling the climate and ecological emergency embedded right at the heart of our corporate strategy. That's represented by the sustainability word in the middle there, and the sustainable environment actions that we've identified. And it's important to mention as well that we do have a decision impact assessment process, which we use to review all of the decisions that we take, from plans to policies to programmes and any other decision alongside it. That it seeks to ensure that we are consistent with our decisions with the climate and ecological emergencies. Based on the risks, we're using the National Audit Office's definition of risk when it comes to climate change. They break it down into these two risks. One is physical risks, and the other is mitigation-based risks. The physical risks can manifest both in terms of the extreme weather events that Jess mentioned before, both being acute and chronic events, but also in how we adapt our region through the process of transition. And part of that is recognising that if we don't adapt quickly enough, we could have productivity impacts and risks, and large valuation risks if things get damaged in the process. There are also risks around our policies and making sure that we are aligned with our net zero declaration, so that we don't fall into the scope of being liable for litigation. And there are some technology risks in that we could invest in technologies which quickly become superseded or unuseful. There is, of course, a strategic uncertainty risk that we have to maintain, and that is about making sure that our current plans and strategies and policies that are not necessarily climate related but relate to infrastructure, the built environment, natural environments, that they are taking into account the uncertainty that's derived by climate change and making sure that we are accommodating it. And that is both a reputational risk from the adaptation perspective, making sure we're doing that as quickly as possible, but also from the net zero mitigation perspective. What we did at the start of this programme back in February and March is we used these documents along with the LGA document on the Councillor's Workbook on Climate Change and the Centre for Public Scrutiny to review the programme and come up with some findings that we thought would address some of the risks that were residual in the organisation. Part of that is about making sure that we have a climate change policy to help us make good decisions, to stop us locking in decisions and emissions at a later stage. Part of it is to make sure that we have a strategy so that we're understanding where it is we're trying to get to and that we have targets that we can align to. Part of it is about making sure that we are aligned and integrated into the other large programs, the big plan and the transformation program, to make sure that we're not missing opportunities. And part of it is to make sure that we are supporting our services so they understand the things that they need to do. They're given targets and they are given a roadmap to deliver to, and that we can then plan with them to deliver that as an organisation. If we have those both plans and roadmaps, we can then start capturing the data and making sure we are tracking our progress. And currently we have not got a good handle on that data, and so that's been a big focus of what we. So our recommendations were to develop the climate change policy, to make sure we have a live and iterative climate change strategy, we centralise action with other corporate priorities, we are supporting our service areas, we're helping develop roadmaps, backcast those actions and business cases, making sure the responsibility for the targets is passed to the service areas so they can best deliver on it, and making sure that we can develop the data models and using all of the fantastic things developed by the transformation program to track and monitor the progress of our program. Those are the things that we thought we really needed to do to stabilise the program and make sure we could track and govern it properly. We also needed to make sure that we could continue with the progress of delivering on the emissions reductions targets and identifying the risks that we had to adapt to. So these are the priorities that we have been working towards this year. And they wrap up neatly into this sort of 9-box mission statement, if you will. I use this to try and simplify exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve. There are 3 lines of focus. One is to make sure that we get the emissions out. That's the net zero mitigation row. One is to make sure that we adapt to the climate risks coming to us. And the third is the ecological restoration programme, which was also part of the declaration. That's split between 3. Part is the net zero corporate side, making sure our back office and all the corporate services and estates are protected and get to net zero. And then we have the third part on the right-hand side, which is about making sure the region is doing the same too. We have a programme in development, and we are, as you can see, in about the November point at the moment. So we've got a lot on, going through the process of developing the climate action strategy at the moment, supporting the local plan. We've developed a local climate partnership with businesses in the region. Developing a corporate estate portfolio to help increase the pace and scale of the changes required across our estate, and supporting the local plan and transformation agendas to embed climate and sustainability into the heart of our policies in the organisation. We do have quite a lot of governance that sits over this already. Some are reporting lines rather than governance, but it's important to show how there are things that are happening with the corporate landscape, the back office, things that are happening within the services, and things that are happening within the region, and that we have different types of approaches to manage the progress through those mechanisms. The most important one really is CMB, making sure that the risk register is up to date and managed, that we have business cases being submitted that are accurate and can deliver on the goals necessary, and that all of those things are reported annually, both internally through the council performance reporting channels, but also externally through various different mechanisms that we're required to report to. I think it's important where we are on the process of releasing the strategy. We did a review back in January, as mentioned. We discussed and shared the findings with the Steerco and the Director Strategy Group to produce a draft strategy. And we have been developing the foundations and testing some of those with the services over the last 6 months. Part of that is about how we structure the work to make sure that we have a set of activities which the services can deliver to, and we've been piloting some of those core components recently. The last few months we've been refreshing that strategy and action plan in order to get a draft to our portfolio holder and the directors management team meeting in December, to get that reviewed to CMB for mid-January, for an all members briefing in February, to overview and scrutiny in March, and then full council. Once that strategy are signed up to, we're fairly confident that we can overcome some of those obstacles that we previously identified in the programme as it was currently structured, and we'll have a clear set of milestones to deliver to at that point. Part of that is about making sure the action plan is refreshed. When it was first developed, it was a set of actions that the organisation thought would be required to get us on the process on the road, but it was never complete. It was never exhaustive. But what we need to do now is take a slightly different approach to that, and we're essentially working backwards from the targets that we have to understand the actions that are going to be required to get us to those targets, and making sure we then put them in roadmaps and set milestones with the delivery dates and ensure that the services understand the targets that are relevant to them, and we've given them trajectories to stick to, and then we can make sure that we can then change the steer code to review those deliveries and make sure that we're reporting upwards from that point forward. Part of it is also about making sure that we open up the work in the programme with the public and other businesses too. And part of this is about engagement, but also it's partly about making sure that we've got all of the people in the region working towards this goal. There are both opportunities and costs if we don't do that. And so filling out those action plans with input from the region is very critical. As of July, we expect that action plan will be updated on the web, and it will remain live in that we recognise that we need to ensure we keep everybody updated with the performance and delivery, but also to make sure that everybody can understand where we are in the process, and as things change, see what that change means for them. I'll stop there. I have got some other slides that I can walk through in terms of progress against some of those commitments. Of time, I'll stop there for the time being.
Thank you very much, Dr. Montgomery. I think what would be helpful to members of the committee, if you like, just as sort of position statement, would be if you could circulate the slides that you've just been talking through, but add to those the additional ones that you're now referring to. I think members of the committee can then judge those two sets of slides against the management of this particular corporate risk. And I think that would help us when we next come to the presentation of corporate risk at a future committee meeting. So if you could do that, it'd be much appreciated. And I think also it strikes me that if you wanted to get the whole strategy to a wider audience outside of BCP Council, one of the avenues might be to try and do that through the Dorset Local Enterprise Partnership, because I think that then has the opportunity to give that a much wider platform across the business community as well as the public sector. So I think both those sectors come together through the LEP, and that might be something you'd like to pursue outside of this meeting. So members, questions? Ms Gibbons.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. I just want to say that Matt does have his video camera on, but for some reason it's not showing on your main screen. I can see him here, and I just wanted to say that just so that people don't think he's being rude and not turning his camera on for you.
Apologies, I'm not sure why that's the case. I am here.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Provident.
Thank you. Mine's a very basic but absolutely key question. The climate emergency was declared, I think I'm right in saying, in 2019. We're now 3 years on, with another only 7 or 8 to go before 2030. How confident are you that we are going to achieve what we want to achieve, namely zero carbon by then?
I'm very confident. Beg your pardon, Chair.
Dr. Montgomery, please go ahead.
I'm very confident. We've got a 20% reduction on our emissions based on 2019 levels already, and as our commitment is net zero, there is always the option of offsetting should we choose it at that point. However, the purpose and the drive for this programme is to get to a point where we do reduce our emissions without offsetting by 2030. But I'm fairly confident we can get to that point. It will require us to programmatise a lot of the work that we've previously been doing in small projects to make sure it can be delivered at pace and scale. And that work is underway at the moment across our corporate estate and some of the community buildings that we lease out for others to use. Those are our predominant emission sources, and so focusing in on them has been a key priority.
Did you want to come back?
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear it, but it would be very useful if some of that detail of what has already been achieved or shortly will be was circulated on to a wider audience, not least us, I think.
So, as I said a moment ago, we need circularisation of those slides plus whichever ancillary ones that we haven't seen. I don't know whether those would cover some of the points just raised. Would they, Dr. Montgomery?
Yes, they would, Chair. And also just to raise the point that this is all being reported in our annual report, which is due to be submitted by January, which will be considered by overview and scrutiny on the 1st of March and then released after that point. But certainly the results at the moment are in the slides as they are, yes.
So I think what I'd recommend is that we receive those slides, both sets, we absorb them, we can then talk to them when we deal with corporate risks at a future meeting and see how we go there. But of course, the wider council issues are not for me. Mine are the audit and governance ones, and I'm sure that Ms Gibbons will pick that up in terms of making sure that the whole of the council is updated on these issues.
Can I just clarify, when I said us, I didn't mean this committee because I'm not normally a member of this committee. I meant us as councillors.
Indeed, and hence my second point. I fully appreciate that. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously there's a twin track approach here. One, first of it's internal and the net zero, the sort of BCP council organisation, but then as well alongside that supporting the region, which is sort of longer term aim. I was interested in one of the slides, as Matt knows, I'm sort of particularly interested in the energy sector and I do some work in that area. One of the slides showed about the local area energy plan, which I think it showed it was sort of currently in progress at the moment. It was in red text. I'm not sure whether that was any indicator about whether there's sort of problems, but is that on target to be delivered? How's that progressing in terms of us having a local area energy plan? Because that's critical for supporting the region to deliver their own net zero.
Dr. Montgomery.
Thank you. Yes, and well noticed. Yes, I'm afraid that red text does mean it has been delayed slightly. The financial situation has meant all non-statutory spend had to be paused, and at the moment that is on pause. And so we will be picking that up again 1st of April, but up until that point, the budget is on pause, I'm afraid.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I mean that does seriously concern me, and it just shows actually that our current financial situation is impacting us delivering on our climate and ecological declaration. And particularly, okay, a local area energy plan doesn't particularly affect us internally, but that will have a significant effects on our local region in terms of them progressing their plans, whether it be businesses or other public sector organisations across the whole area delivering their own plans for net zero. So yeah, I think that's a serious risk in us delivering on our climate and ecological emergency. And, I don't know if it's something that's already in our risk register that about council finances and the financial position. If we've had to suspend spending on it and then we say, oh well, we're going to pick that up in April, then in my view that's not good enough.
Well, I think Ms Gibbons, you might want to pick that up in the paper that you're putting out to all members, because I think that's an issue that will need to be addressed. Better that it's addressed early and with clarity than speculation grows around it. And I think at this stage in the budget process, that would be probably quite a good time to be doing it. And I agree that to leave it till April will be a little bit too far over the horizon. So no reason not to do it now. I have, I think, a question from Councillor Howell online. Are you there, Councillor Howell?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Firstly, when was it agreed that offsetting was legitimate in terms of reaching net zero? I mean, it's widely accepted that there aren't enough, resources to offset with, and we would just be, taking resources away from, or credits, or whatever you propose to call them, away from other people and other organisations. When was that decided, and who made that decision?
Is that a question for Dr. Montgomery?
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid that's given in the net zero phrase itself. The net part in that context means that offsetting is perfectly legitimate in reaching that goal. But I do agree with the sentiment of your comment and question, is that that is not a desirable set of things to do. No, we should be reducing our emissions in the first instance. First of all, because that's the moral and ethical thing to do. Secondly, because it reduces our costs. And thirdly, because it will avoid the potential cost spike as everybody scrambles for offsets past 2030, as I think you're intimating is the case. So the ideal is that we don't need to rely on offsets, but we can as a backup if we have to make sure that we do meet that declaration.
Okay, so I mean,
Councillor Howell.
yeah, just like to just supplementary on that one. So that is interesting because I hadn't thought of it in that way. So, but essentially, what you're saying is that net zero is not possible because there aren't enough offsets for everybody. So, in a global sense, net zero is not possible.
I'm not saying that. No, it is possible. It just will be expensive, and it's not desirable.
Okay, well, why is it not desirable?
Because it would be expensive, and as pointed out, that isn't actually reducing the emissions that we're emitting, it's offsetting.
But achieving net zero is desirable.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, sorry, I thought that's what you... Okay, I mean, the other question was in relation to what is the biggest corporate risk in terms of climate change in this area, which must be rise in sea levels. To what degree does the council understand what the impact of different rises in average temperature would have in effect in terms of sea level rise and the impact on our infrastructure?
Dr. Montgomery.
We're in the process of understanding the impact. We've had a climate change risk assessment carried out this year, which has identified the risks, and coastal erosion is one of those main risks that has been identified, along with heat and flooding and some of the impacts to the natural environment. I think it's fair to say our FCERN team understand the risk to the coastal erosion very well and are working very hard at coming up with solutions. However, this is a long-term problem, and it is one that is particularly wicked in that it is going to be very difficult to solve, because it will either mean that there is a sacrifice of our beach to keep the cliff, or a sacrifice of the cliff to keep the beach. And it's a long-term decision and one that hasn't been thought through fully yet, and that's the part of the process of adaptation planning, which we're just in the mechanisms of recruiting for an adaptation plan manager to come on board. And so that is the next stage of the impact assessment. The risk assessment is to turn those risks into impacts and to try and quantify exactly what it is that will occur.
Yes, thank you. But to go back to my question, will you be looking at particular temperature levels so that you will be able to see, presumably that's the first step to identifying what the risk is, to how you prepare some mitigation. You must understand what at different levels of temperature, what the likely increase in sea level is going to be.
There's a number of scenarios with probabilities of possible sea level rises based on those scenarios, and those scenarios are based on the emissions that are generated over a given time frame. And yes, the level of coastal erosion will increase based on the sea level rise, which is a direct result of the amount of emissions that are generated in that time. However, coastal erosion in itself is much more complex, I'm afraid, as both the temperature and the precipitation can affect the coastal stability itself. And so there's a number of different dynamics that need to be taken into account when modelling that. And this is where the FCERN team is the best place to be able to do that modelling themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference, isn't there, between coastal erosion and just things being underwater. I certainly, I mean, I don't have an idea. So I'm sure that most people living in BCP don't have an idea of, the likely increases that may occur at certain levels, and the viability of living, and working at the kind of pretty much sea level height that the considerable part of our conurbation is at. So I'm just wondering, when you finished your research, will that research be published publicly in a way that people can see, the likely impacts at different temperature rises?
Absolutely, that research will be not only published and externally available, but will have to include communities and key stakeholders in the process of understanding what we will do about those impacts and risks, because we won't be able to protect from a hard engineering perspective everything, and so we'll have to find other mechanisms to manage risks outside of hard engineered solutions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Ms Gibbons, you wanted to come back?
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just going to say, and I think Matt did allude to it there, is that in terms of the coastal erosion, in terms of the planning for that, Matt and his team are working very closely with our SSM team. So if the committee are interested in understanding in more detail those risks, I would suggest we invite Matt Hosey, the head of that service area, who is absolutely expert in this area. They've done a lot of modelling work. Many of you will be aware of the work they're doing around the Christchurch strategy, coastal strategy there at the moment, consultation that's going on that. So if there is further interest specifically in that area, I would suggest we invite Matt along to present.
Well, I think that would probably be quite well received by members generally. I'm not specific about this committee because our focus is somewhat narrow, but I always believe that the more communications, effective communications you can have within a council to all members, the better. Because then everybody's hearing and receiving the same information, the same data at the same time. And if that's backed up with a pack of slides or whatever it is, then there can be no doubt as to the consistency of the council. So members, if you're done on questions, I wanted to bring Ms Manton in, just if you like to deal with both items 6 and 7 from the perspective that she has as the facilitator of the risk register, and any brief comments that you have, Ms Manton, around that, which you may or may not decide need to be fed into the next risk register that we receive as Audit and Governance. Any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really helpful to have the presentations on these particular risks provided to the committee. It gives a bit more in-depth information on these individual risks. Obviously, in addition to the ongoing dynamic risk reviews that are currently being undertaken by the Corporate Management Board, we are currently in the live review phase for each of the corporate risks at the moment, which will inform the summary report for the January committee. Each risk is currently being reviewed, which includes a meeting between myself and the risk lead. So at this meeting, we talk through each of the individual risks, and then we provide an update for that report. So as part of these risk reviews, I will be making presentation in terms of what we've heard tonight, and make sure that tonight's discussions are included as part of the update. Obviously, some of the corporate risks are interrelated, so where appropriate, where we may have touched on them tonight, I'll make sure that they link into those risks as well. So thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to tie that in.
Thank you very much, Ms Manton. That's very helpful. Councillor Phipps, is your question to Ms Manton? Oh, all right, yes. Could I say thank you very much, Ms Manton. We look forward to receiving that at our regular meeting in January, and we'll be able, no doubt, to unpick both of these if that's necessary. You might want in your covering report for that meeting to highlight these two areas, not just on the risk register, but in the covering report, and perhaps allude to whatever changes you have made as a result of this evening's work by the committee. I think that would be helpful in continuity terms, not just for us, but for those members who are not present tonight, but may well be with us in January. I think it would tie it over much better. So thank you very much indeed for input that you've made this evening.
Thank you.
Councillor Phipps.
It's just clarity before you finish the meeting. I made a request for a self-contained table showing the transformation programme. Did we actually agree that we would receive that at some point, or what was going to happen with that? I know there were going to be updates. I heard that from the chief executive, and somebody said, "Oh, I think that's a good idea," didn't you? I think so. I just wanted clarity on that, please, because I think it's a really good idea, and it would be a lot easier for us to understand if we had something like that.
So can I tell you what my expectation is, and then the chief executive can tell me whether that matches with his. What I've asked for is the 2 sets of slides to come to us as members of this committee, because there is information there which we haven't received this evening, but it is available. So that's the audit and governance piece. But then on a wider canvas, that for the whole council is, I think, the tabulated work that we've asked Mr. Richards and the Chief Executive to discuss outside of this meeting, to come up with something that's going to be informative and give greater clarity to members across the council, not just for us, but for everybody. Was that your understanding, Chief Executive?
That's absolutely spot on. And I think I undertook to talk to the chair of this committee about how to present that. Maybe I should undertake to talk to Councillor Phipps as well, as she has a particular interest in it, so if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'll send you the table that I thought might help, if you like. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be actually, rather than having separate conversations, if you sent that through, then I think you'll be able to see the clarity very quickly. I think if we've been instrumental in doing that this evening, I think that'll be a service to the rest of the council, actually. So thank you for the comment. Members, we've been through all the items on the agenda. I hope those who are filling casual vacancies have found it interesting. I hope we've all found it interesting, but specifically those members. And I therefore screen's gone blank. Therefore close the meeting at 20:10. Thank you all for attending, and a very good evening to you all.